They called her the Hollow Soul. For 6 months, Morgana Jackson had scrubbed the ancient stones of the ironclad citadel, invisible to everyone except when they needed someone to punish. She was a servant without a history, a wolfless phantom who had woken in the infirmary with no memory of who she was or how she had arrived. The court physicians said her mind was shattered by fever. The other servants whispered she was cursed. Some claimed she was a spy sent by rival packs. Others believed she was simply mad. Morgana believed them all. What else could explain the emptiness where her past should be? What else could explain why she felt nothing when she tried to remember her family, her home, even her own face before 6 months ago? But every night when the Alpha King's infant son wailed until the castle walls trembled, when his cries echoed through the corridors and made the servants cover their ears in anguish, Morgana felt something clawing beneath her breastbone. Something ancient. Something that recognized that cry with a certainty that defied her amnesia. Her chest would ache. Her hands would tremble. And she would stand frozen in whatever dark corner she occupied, fighting the primal urge to run toward that sound. They said the pup was inconsolable, that he had been screaming since his mother vanished during the Great Fever 8 months ago. The same fever that had supposedly ravaged Morgana's mind. They said Prince Evander Rhys was frail, broken, too weak to survive his first winter. They said he cried because he was damaged, because he would never be strong enough to rule, because the moon goddess had cursed the Iverson line. They were all lying. Every single one of them. Because when Morgana finally dared to look into that nursery, when she finally glimpsed what lay hidden behind the silk curtains and silver bars, she did not see a damaged child crying from weakness. She saw violet eyes blazing with fury and recognition, the starlight iris, the mark that only appeared in her bloodline. The mark she'd seen in her own reflection when moonlight struck her face just right. The mark that shouldn't exist in the Alpha King's heir unless she was his mother. Unless everything they'd told her was a carefully constructed lie. Unless the woman preparing to take the Luna's crown, the beautiful and ruthless Ravenna Joseph, had stolen more than just a throne. The truth crashed into Morgana like a tidal wave. She wasn't broken. She was buried. And the moment that infant's eyes met hers, the moment his cries finally ceased and his tiny hand reached for her face, she understood. The pup wasn't crying because he was weak. He was crying because he knew the monster sitting beside his father wasn't his mother. And now that Morgana remembered, now that the dam had broken and 6 months of stolen memories came flooding back with the force of a celestial reckoning, she was going to burn Ravenna's kingdom of lies to ash. Starting tonight. The servants' wing of the ironclad citadel reeked of damp stone, harsh lie, and suffocated dreams. Morgana knelt on the frost-kissed flagstones outside the grand hall, scrubbing at a rust-colored stain that had been there longer than her fragmented memories. Her fingertips were split and weeping. The head housekeeper, a hawk-faced woman named Marta, had assigned her this task 4 hours ago with a sneer that suggested she hoped Morgana would still be kneeling come dawn. Still crawling in the dirt, little ghost? A sharp heel struck stone. Morgana didn't need to raise her eyes. She knew that voice. It dripped with poisoned honey and belonged to Lady Ravenna Joseph, the unmated daughter of the southern warlord. Ravenna had arrived at the citadel 3 months before Morgana's mysterious appearance, positioning herself as the inevitable replacement for the lost Luna. The true Luna, Alpha King Lucian Iverson's fated mate, had allegedly perished during the great fever that had swept through the kingdom. At least, that was the story carved into every tongue. "The stain is old, my lady," Morgana murmured, keeping her gaze fixed on the wet stone. "It may not lift." Ravenna's laugh was crystalline and cruel, making the other servants freeze mid-task like rabbits sensing a wolf. She was beautiful the way a blade was beautiful, dark hair tumbling over ivory shoulders, lips stained the color of fresh kill, eyes like polished obsidian that revealed nothing and consumed everything. Then scrub until your bones show through. Ravenna's boot came down on Morgana's hand, grinding her scarred knuckles against the unforgiving floor. Morgana bit down on her tongue until copper flooded her mouth. "The Alpha King is receiving the northern emissaries tomorrow at sunset. If he sees this filth marring his halls, I will personally ensure you are banished to the fangs of winter. The threat hung in the air like smoke. The fangs of winter, the execution grounds where traitors were chained to posts and left for the elements to claim. Morgana had scrubbed the blood from those stones more than once. Ravenna lifted her boots slowly, deliberately, savoring the way Morgana's shoulders trembled. Do try to make yourself useful, hollow soul. It's the only reason you're still breathing. The lady swept away in a cascade of black silk, leaving Morgana gasping on the floor. Around her, the other servants returned to their tasks with rigid efficiency, their eyes carefully averted. No one helped her. No one ever did. But as Morgana pressed her bleeding hand against her chest and felt her heart hammering against her ribs, she heard it again. Cry. It started low, a mournful keen that seemed to seep through the very walls of the citadel. Then it grew, rising in pitch and desperation until it became a wail that made the candles flicker and the servants wince. Prince Evander Reese. There. The pup who never slept. And as that sound pierced through Morgana's skull, something inside her answered. Her chest cavity ached with a recognition she couldn't name, couldn't remember. Her hands trembled not from pain but from a desperate, clawing need to reach that child. The other servants covered their ears. Marta slammed a door. Someone muttered a prayer to the moon goddess. But Morgana stood, water dripping from her raw hands, and turned toward the sound. Toward the royal wing. Toward the nursery she was forbidden to enter under penalty of death. Her feet moved before her mind could catch up. The logical part of her, the part that remembered 6 months of beatings and deprivation, screamed at her to stop. But the other part, the part that woke screaming from dreams of fire and betrayal, the part that felt that infant's cry like a spear through her soul, propelled her forward. The corridors blurred past. Servants scattered from her path, their faces painted with shock. The hollow soul never moved with purpose. The hollow soul never disobeyed. But Morgana wasn't hollow anymore. She was burning. The nursery door loomed before her, carved ironwood banded with silver, flanked by 2 guards who barely glanced at the disheveled maid approaching. They were accustomed to servants scurrying past with their heads down. They weren't prepared for Morgana to reach for the handle. Stop! One guard grabbed her shoulder. Servants are not permitted. The infant's scream reached a crescendo that made the guard flinch. In that moment of distraction, Morgana twisted free and shoved through the door. The nursery was draped in shadow and silver moonlight. Sheer curtains billowed around an ornate bassinet carved from ancient oak. The room smelled of lavender and despair. And in that bassinet, surrounded by silk blankets and expensive toys he would never touch, was the source of the sound that haunted her sleep. Prince Evander Reese. Morgana approached on trembling legs. Behind her, she heard the guards shouting, heard boots pounding down the corridor. She had seconds, maybe less. She reached the bassinet and looked down. The infant was small, too small for 8 months. His face was flushed red from crying, his tiny fists clenched. But it was his eyes, those wide, luminous eyes, that made Morgana's entire world shatter and reform. They were violet. Not the common blue of newborns or the brown of the Iverson line. Violet. The starlight iris. The mark of the Jackson bloodline. The mark that appeared only in direct descendants of the celestial wolf line. The mark that she carried hidden beneath her own dark pupils when moonlight struck her face at certain angles. No, Morgana whispered, but her hands were already reaching into the bassinet. No, it's not possible. Her fingertips brushed the child's cheek. The world exploded. The psychic shockwave hit her like a physical blow, driving her to her knees. The nursery disappeared. The guards' shouts faded into nothing. Reality itself seemed to peel away, revealing layers of truth that had been buried beneath 6 months of magical manipulation. She saw herself standing in the grand hall, draped in ceremonial white furs trimmed with silver. Lucian stood beside her, his hand clasped in hers, his eyes burning with pride and devotion as he spoke the ancient binding vows. The pack howled their approval. She felt the weight of the Luna's crown being placed upon her head, felt the surge of power as the mate bond locked into place, connecting her soul to Lucian's with threads of starlight. The vision shifted. She was dancing, her body swollen with pregnancy, Lucian's arms wrapped protectively around her. He whispered promises against her hair. Promises of forever. Promises of the family they would build. The pack celebrated around them, their joy a tangible force. Another shift and she was screaming. Labor pains tore through her as Lucian held her hand, terror and awe warring on his face. And then blessed relief. The sound of an infant's first cry. Lucian placing their son in her arms, tears streaming down his face as he pressed his forehead to hers. "He has your eyes," Lucian had whispered. "The starlight iris. He's perfect, Morgana. You're perfect." But then the memories turned dark. Ravenna's face, twisted with jealousy and rage. A private dinner where wine was poured. Morgana lifting the cup to her lips, not seeing the shimmer of dark magic coating the rim. The first sip burned like acid. The second made her vision swim. By the third she was collapsing. Lucian's roar of anguish as magical chains, visible only to those with witch sight, wrapped around his skull like a crown of thorns. His eyes glazing over as Ravenna chanted words in a tongue older than the kingdom itself. Memory-binding sorcery. Mind manipulation that would make him forget his mate, forget the true Luna, forget everything except what Ravenna wanted him to believe. And Morgana, paralyzed on the floor, could only watch as her mate's recognition of her died in his eyes. She saw herself being dragged from the hall by guards whose minds had been similarly compromised. Saw herself thrown into the servants' quarters, her royal furs stripped away, her identity erased. Saw the court physician, one of Ravenna's pawns, administering potions that kept her own memories suppressed, fractured, just barely out of reach. For 6 months, she had lived as a ghost in her own kingdom, while Ravenna positioned herself as the future Luna. While her infant son cried himself hoarse every night, instinctively knowing that his mother had been stolen. While Lucian walked past her in the corridors, his eyes sliding over her as if she were nothing. Because to him, under Ravenna's spell, she was nothing. The visions released her with brutal suddenness. Morgana gasped, her hands still touching her son's face. Tears streamed down her cheeks as the full weight of the truth settled into her bones. She wasn't a servant. She wasn't hollow. She wasn't broken. She was Morgana Jackson Iverson, Luna Queen of the Ironclad Pack, rightful mate to Alpha King Lucian Iverson, and the mother of the future king. And Ravenna Joseph had stolen everything. The infant, her son Evander, had stopped crying the moment she touched him. Now he stared up at her with those impossible violet eyes, recognition blazing in their depths. His tiny hand reached for her face, grasping at her tears. "Mama," Morgana breathed, the word breaking on a sob. "I'm here. Remember. I'm so sorry, my love. I'm..." "Seize her." The guards burst through the door, weapons drawn. But Morgana couldn't move. She was frozen, one hand still cradling her son's face, her mind reeling from the avalanche of restored memories. Rough hands yanked her away from the bassinet. Evander immediately began wailing again, his cries more desperate than before, his small arms reaching for her. "I'm his mother," Morgana screamed, struggling against the iron grip. The guard's hands bit into her arms as they dragged her backward. "I'm the Luna. I am Morgana Jackson Iverson, and that is my son." "The hollow soul has lost her mind," one guard muttered. "Get her out of here before she wakes the entire wing," the other snapped. "No. You don't understand." Morgana thrashed in their hold, her eyes locked on Evander's violet gaze. "He knows me." He stopped crying because he knows. A fist connected with her jaw, and stars exploded across her vision. Her knees buckled. The guards hauled her upright, dragging her toward the door even as consciousness wavered. "My son," she gasped, blood filling her mouth. "Please, he needs me." "He." Another blow, this one to her temple. Darkness rushed in like a tide. But even as the world faded, Even as they dragged her limp body from the nursery, she could hear Evander crying. And this time she understood exactly what those cries meant. The monster wearing his mother's crown is not me. The woman sitting beside father is a liar and a thief. Help me. Save us. Come back. Morgana's last conscious thought, before the blackness claimed her completely, was a promise. I will. Even if it kills me. Even if I have to tear down this entire kingdom stone by stone. I will save you, my son. I will reclaim what's mine. And Ravenna Joseph will burn for every tear you've cried. If this story has held you this long, subscribing is how you help it continue. Thank you. Now back to the story. Morgana woke to the taste of blood and iron. Her jaw throbbed where the guard had struck her, and her wrists burned from the silver-laced manacles clamped around them. Silver, the one metal that could suppress a wolf's power, though it hardly mattered when she supposedly had no wolf to suppress. Except she did. She always had. The memories were crystalline now, unbreakable. She was Luna. She was Evander's mother. And the man she'd been mated to, the man whose soul had been bound to hers under a blood moon, was about to condemn her to death without recognizing her face. The throne room of the ironclad citadel was a cathedral of stone and shadow. Massive pillars carved with ancient pack sigils rose toward a vaulted ceiling lost in darkness. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting flickering light across the assembled court. Morgana was forced to her knees on the cold marble floor, her head bowed, her servant's dress torn and stained with blood. She could feel him before she saw him. The mate bond, even suppressed by Ravenna's sorcery, still hummed beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. It pulled at her chest, demanding she look up, demanding she reach for him. Bring her forward. Lucian's voice was granite and winter wind. It was the voice that had whispered promises against her skin, that had spoken their son's name with reverence and awe. Now it held nothing but cold authority. The guards hauled Morgana to her feet and shoved her forward. She stumbled, her manacled hands struggling for balance, until she stood at the base of the dais. And finally she looked up. Lucian Iverson sat on the throne like a king carved from storm clouds. He was massive, his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the kingdom, his presence filling the room with barely contained power. Long hair the color of winter wheat fell past his shoulders, and his eyes, those eyes that had once looked at her with such devastating tenderness, were now the cold amber of a predator assessing prey. He looked tired, haunted. There were shadows beneath his eyes that hadn't been there before, lines of stress carved into his face. Morgana's heart cracked at the sight. Ravenna's spell might have stolen his memories of their bond, but it couldn't erase the toll of losing a mate. His soul knew something was missing, even if his mind had been manipulated into forgetting what. Beside him, draped across a smaller throne like a serpent sunning itself, sat Ravenna Joseph. She wore a gown of deep crimson that made her look like she'd bathed in blood. Her dark hair was elaborately styled, threaded with silver chains, and a circlet rested on her brow, not yet a crown, but a promise of one to come. Her lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes as she watched Morgana with undisguised satisfaction. "Your Majesty," the lead guard bowed. "We caught this servant trespassing in the royal nursery. She was found touching the young prince. When we attempted to remove her, she became violent and made wild claims about. I am Morgana Jackson Iverson." The words tore from Morgana's throat before she could stop them. "I am your mate, Lucian. I am your Luna. That child she keeps from you is our son, and this woman," she turned her fury on Ravenna, "this which has poisoned your mind with dark magic." Silence crashed through the throne room like a physical force. Then Ravenna laughed. It was a delicate musical sound that somehow made Morgana's skin crawl. "Oh, how tragic," she cooed, rising gracefully from her seat. "The poor creature truly has lost her mind. Your Majesty, this is the girl they call the Hollow Soul. She was found wandering the grounds 6 months ago, delirious with fever. The physicians said her memories were destroyed. It seems the damage was worse than we thought." Morgana's eyes locked on Lucian's face, searching desperately for any flicker of recognition. "Lucian, please. Look at me. Really look at me. You know me. We were married beneath the blood moon. You placed the Luna's crown on my head. You held my hand when I gave birth to Evander. You promised me forever." "Enough." Lucian's voice cut through her words like a blade. His expression was carved stone, revealing nothing. "I have never seen you before in my life." The words hit Morgana like arrows, each one finding its mark. She could see the absolute certainty in his eyes, the magical compulsion that made him incapable of seeing the truth even when it stood bleeding before him. Ravenna's spell work was masterful, a web of enchantment so thorough that it had rewritten reality itself in his mind. "My mate died 8 months ago," Lucian continued, his voice rougher now, as if speaking the words caused him physical pain. "The Luna perished bringing my son into this world. I mourned her. I still mourn her. And you?" His gaze hardened. "You dare to stand in my hall and claim her name. You dare to defile her memory with your delusions. They're not delusions." Morgana's voice cracked. She took a step forward, and immediately guards moved to restrain her. "Lucian, the child has violet eyes. The starlight iris. That's the Jackson bloodline, my bloodline. How else would your son carry that mark unless I am his mother?" For just a moment, one fractured, desperate moment, she saw something flicker behind Lucian's eyes. Confusion. The mate bond thrummed between them, trying to break through the magical chains wrapped around his mind. But Ravenna was faster. "The child's eyes are a mystery, yes," she said smoothly, moving to stand beside Lucian's throne. Her hand rested on his shoulder with possessive casualty. "The court physicians believe it may be a recessive trait from the Luna's distant ancestry. A final gift from the woman we all loved so dearly." Her voice dripped false sympathy. "But to use that innocent child to support such vile lies. Your Majesty, this woman is clearly dangerous." She broke into the royal nursery. She put her hands on the heir to the throne. She could have harmed him. "I would never harm him," Morgana shouted. "He's my son. He stopped crying the moment I touched him because he knows me. He recognizes his own mother." "The child stopped crying because you startled him into silence," Ravenna countered coldly. "Guards, tell His Majesty what happened after this woman was removed from the nursery." The lead guard stepped forward, his expression grim. "The prince began crying again immediately, my lady. More distressed than before." Morgana's heart shattered. Of course Evander had cried. She'd been ripped away from him again, leaving him alone with a woman whose very presence must feel wrong to his infant instincts. Lucian rose from his throne, and the room seemed to shrink around him. His presence was overwhelming, alpha dominance rolling off him in waves that made lesser wolves in the court drop their gazes. He descended the dais steps slowly, each footfall echoing through the chamber like a judge's gavel. He stopped directly in front of Morgana. This close, she could smell him. Pine and winter storms and something uniquely his that made her wolf whine in recognition even though she couldn't shift. The mate bond screamed at her to reach for him, to make him remember, to break through whatever dark magic held him prisoner. But when Lucian looked at her, there was nothing in his eyes but cold judgment. "I don't know what sickness has taken root in your mind," he said quietly. "But you will not speak my mate's name again. You will not claim kinship to my son. And you will not spread your poison through my court." "Lucian." "The Luna's name was Morgana Jackson Iverson," he continued, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "She was brave and fierce and beautiful. She was the light of this kingdom and the keeper of my heart. She died bringing our son into this world, and I would have traded places with her if the gods had allowed it." His hand moved to his chest, as if he could feel the empty space where their bond should sing. "You are not her. You are not fit to breathe her name." Tears streamed down Morgana's face. "I am her," she whispered. "I'm right here. I never died. I was stolen from you. We were both stolen from each other." But he couldn't hear her. The spell wouldn't let him. Ravenna descended the dais with serpentine grace, her crimson gown trailing behind her like a river of blood. Your Majesty, we cannot allow this mad woman to remain in the citadel. She has proven herself a danger to the prince. To you. To the entire court. She paused, letting the words sink in. There is only one appropriate sentence for such crimes. Lucian's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Morgana could see the war happening behind his eyes. Some part of him, some buried, enchanted part, was fighting against what he was about to do. But Ravenna's magic was too strong. You are sentenced to the fangs of winter, Lucian said, and his voice was empty of everything except duty. You will be taken to the execution grounds at dawn and bound to the post. If you survive 3 days and 3 nights in the ice, you will be released with banishment. If you do not. He turned away from her. Then the gods will have rendered their judgment. The fangs of winter. The execution ground where the worst traitors were sent to freeze to death. No one had ever survived the full 3 days. Most died within the first night. No. Morgana lunged forward, but the guard's grip was iron. Lucian, please. Look at me. I'm your mate. You're sending your mate to die. But he was already walking back to his throne. His shoulders rigid. His hands clenched into fists. He didn't look back. Ravenna, however, did. She turned to face Morgana with a smile of pure triumph. Take her away, she ordered the guards. Then softer, meant only for Morgana's ears. You should have stayed in the shadows where I put you, hollow soul. Now you'll freeze in them. As the guards dragged Morgana from the throne room, she screamed. She screamed Lucian's name, screamed the truth that no one would hear, screamed until her voice broke and blood flecked her lips. And through it all, she could hear Evander crying in the distance. Her son, her mate, her life, all being stolen from her again while magic-blind eyes watched and did nothing. The last thing Morgana saw before they hauled her through the doors was Ravenna leaning close to Lucian, whispering something in his ear while her hand traced possessive patterns on his arm. The woman who had destroyed her life was now consolidating her victory. And Morgana was being sent to die in the ice, condemned by the very man whose soul was bound to hers. Unless she could find a way to survive. Unless the power buried in her blood, the celestial heritage that Ravenna had tried so hard to suppress, could finally break free. Because Morgana Jackson Iverson was done being a victim. She was done being hollow. And when the ice failed to kill her, when the dormant wolf in her veins finally woke with the fury of 1,000 betrayals, she would return to this citadel. And she would burn Ravenna's lies to ash. The fangs of winter earned its name honestly. Jagged ice formations rose from the frozen ground like the teeth of some ancient beast, and the wind howled through them with a sound that could drive men mad. The execution post stood at the center of this desolate wasteland, a pillar of black stone worn smooth by centuries of condemned prisoners chained to its surface. Morgana's wrists were raw and bleeding where the silver manacles bit into her skin. The guards had stripped her of her servant's dress, leaving her in nothing but a thin shift that provided no protection against the merciless cold. They'd chained her to the post with her arms stretched above her head, forcing her to stand on legs that already trembled with exhaustion and cold. The sun was setting, painting the ice fields in shades of blood and gold. Soon it would be full dark, and the true cold would descend. The kind of cold that turned breath to ice crystals. The kind of cold that made bones brittle and hearts stop. The guards had left her without ceremony, their faces carefully blank. One of them had hesitated at the last moment, something like pity flickering in his eyes, but his companion had pulled him away. No one wanted to witness what happened at the fangs of winter. The screaming usually lasted through the first night. But Morgana wasn't screaming. Not yet. She was thinking. 6 months ago, when she'd woken in that infirmary with no memories, the physicians had told her she was wolfless. A broken omega with no pack, no power, no purpose. She'd believed them because she had no reason not to. Every attempt to shift had failed, leaving her feeling empty and hollow. Now she understood why. Ravenna's magic hadn't just suppressed her memories, it had chained her wolf, locked it so deep inside her that it might as well have never existed. The spell was thorough, binding not just her ability to shift but her connection to the primal power that ran through her bloodline. The Jackson line wasn't just any wolf clan. They were descended from the celestial wolves, the first pack blessed directly by the moon goddess herself. That's where the starlight iris came from, a physical manifestation of divine favor that appeared in their eyes. With it came power that most modern wolves couldn't even comprehend. Ravenna had known. Of course she'd known. That's why she'd worked so hard to suppress it, to keep Morgana weak and compliant and forgotten. But touching Evander had cracked the first seal. And now, with death staring her in the face, with ice beginning to form on her eyelashes and her breath coming in ragged gasps, Morgana could feel something stirring in the depths of her soul. Something vast. Something furious. Something that had been caged for far too long. The temperature dropped as full darkness fell. Morgana's teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue, and the taste of copper filled her mouth. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago. Her toes were following. She could feel the cold burrowing into her bones, patient and merciless. This was how they died. The condemned prisoners of the fangs of winter. They froze slowly, their bodies shutting down piece by piece, until hypothermia dragged them into a sleep they'd never wake from. But as Morgana's vision began to blur and her thoughts turned sluggish, she heard a sound that cut through the howling wind. Evander. Crying. It wasn't possible. The citadel was miles away, separated from the execution grounds by forests and frozen rivers. There was no way she could hear her son from here. And yet she did. Not with her ears, but with something deeper. The mate bond might be suppressed, but the bond between mother and child, forged in blood and starlight, was something even Ravenna's magic couldn't fully sever. Her son was crying for her. Crying himself sick in that nursery while a usurper sat on his mother's throne and his father remained blind to the truth. No. The word escaped through Morgana's frozen lips. No. I won't. I won't leave him. The cold pressed in harder, as if nature itself was trying to silence her defiance. I won't die here. Her voice was stronger now, fueled by rage and desperation and a mother's love that could move mountains. I won't let her win. I won't let my son grow up believing his mother abandoned him. Something cracked deep inside her chest. Not her ribs breaking from the cold, but something else. Something that had been bound in magical chains for 6 months, strangled and suffocated and locked away. Her wolf. The sensation was like lightning striking her spine. Power, pure, overwhelming celestial power, came flooding through her veins like molten silver. Her eyes, already beginning to glaze with approaching death, suddenly blazed with violet light so bright it turned the darkness to day. The silver manacles began to smoke where they touched her skin. I am Morgana Jackson Iverson, she whispered, and her voice resonated with authority that shook the very ice beneath her feet. Luna, queen of the ironclad pack. Daughter of the celestial line. Mother of the future king. The manacles shattered. The chains exploded into fragments of silver that scattered across the frozen ground like falling stars. Morgana collapsed forward, her hands hitting the ice, but she wasn't weak anymore. She wasn't dying anymore. She was ascending. The transformation that overtook her wasn't like any normal shift. When wolves changed, it was usually a fluid movement, bones realigning for sprouting, a brief moment of controlled pain. But what happened to Morgana was something else entirely. It was cataclysmic. Her body erupted with light. Pure white radiance that banished every shadow, that turned the fangs of winter from a place of death into something transcendent. Her spine arched as power poured through her, centuries of dormant celestial heritage awakening all at once. She felt her bones lengthening, felt muscle and sinew reshaping themselves, felt for the color of fresh snow erupting across her skin. But she didn't just become a wolf. She became something that hadn't walked the earth in over 1,000 years. When the light finally faded, what stood where Morgana had been chained was a creature of legend. A wolf so massive she towered over the execution post, her shoulders level with the tops of the ice formations that had given the place its name. Her fur was pure white shot through with threads of silver that seemed to move like starlight. And her eyes blazed with violet fire, the starlight iris magnified 100-fold, casting radiant beams across the frozen wasteland. She was a celestial wolf, the first to manifest in a millennium. And she was magnificent. Morgana threw back her head and howled. The sound rolled across the ice fields like thunder, primal and powerful and impossibly beautiful. It was a howl of fury and freedom and righteous rage. It was a declaration of war. And 8 miles away, in the heart of the ironclad citadel, every spell Ravenna Joseph had woven shattered like glass. The enchantments that had clouded Lucian's mind, that had hidden Morgana's identity, that had made the court forget their true Luna, all of them collapsed under the weight of celestial power that simply refused to be contained any longer. In the throne room, Lucian Iverson staggered as if he'd been struck. His hand flew to his chest where the mate bond suddenly blazed to life, no longer suppressed, no longer hidden. The connection snapped into place with such force it drove him to his knees. And with it came the memories. All of them. Every stolen moment, every erased truth, every lie that Ravenna had fed him came crashing down. He saw his wedding to Morgana, felt the weight of her hand in his as they spoke their vows. He remembered her pregnancy, remembered holding his newborn son for the first time while Morgana smiled exhaustedly from the birthing bed. He remembered the dinner where Ravenna had poisoned her, remembered watching helplessly as magic wrapped around his mind like iron bands, forcing him to forget, forcing him to believe his mate was dead when she'd been right there in his castle all along. "No," Lucian gasped, his fingers clawing at the stone floor. "No, gods, no. Your Majesty." Ravenna's voice was sharp with panic. She could feel her magic unraveling, could sense the catastrophic failure of every carefully woven spell. "What's happening? What?" But Lucian was already moving. He surged to his feet with a roar that shook the rafters, his eyes blazing alpha gold as his own wolf clawed for dominance. "Morgana!" The name was a battle cry and a prayer and a desperate plea all at once. Ravenna went white. "How do you can't remember the spell should. Where is she?" Lucian grabbed Ravenna by the throat and lifted her off her feet, his grip just shy of crushing her windpipe. "What did you do to my mate?" Ravenna choked, her fingers scrabbling uselessly at his hand. "The fangs of winter," someone said. They both turned to see the captain of the guard standing in the doorway, his face ashen. "You sent her to the fangs of winter, Your Majesty." At dawn. The blood drained from Lucian's face. He dropped Ravenna like something diseased and was moving before his mind fully processed the implications. The fangs of winter. Morgana had been there for hours. In the ice. In the killing cold. Chained and helpless. He might already be too late. Lucian shifted mid-stride, his body exploding into his alpha form, a massive gray wolf with eyes like molten amber. He hit the corridor at a dead run, using every ounce of supernatural speed he possessed, his mind screaming a single desperate plea. "Hold on. Please, gods, hold on. I'm coming. I'm so sorry. I'm coming." But as he burst through the citadel gates and raced toward the execution grounds, as the mate bond pulled him forward like a compass pointing true north, he felt it. Power. Vast and ancient and blindingly bright. It washed over him like a tidal wave, and he knew instantly what it meant. Morgana hadn't died. She had transformed, and when Lucian finally crested the ridge overlooking the fangs of winter, when he saw the colossal white wolf standing among the shattered chains with violet fire blazing from her eyes, when he felt the full weight of her celestial power radiating outward like a second sun, he understood. His mate hadn't just survived. She had ascended. And Ravenna Joseph's reign of lies was about to end in fire and starlight. Morgana's paws struck the frozen ground with enough force to crack the ice beneath her. Each stride covered impossible distances, her celestial form moving with a grace that belied her massive size. The mate bond pulled her forward like a silver thread, leading her back to the citadel, back to her son, back to the mate who could finally see her. She could feel Lucian racing toward her, his own wolf form eating up the distance between them. The bond sang with his desperation, his anguish, his desperate need to reach her. But there was no time for reunions. Not yet. Because through the bond, Morgana could also feel something else. Darkness gathering at the citadel like storm clouds. Magic that reeked of blood and forbidden rituals. And beneath it all, the sound of her son screaming. Ravenna was making her move. Morgana pushed harder, her muscles burning with divine fire. The forest blurred past, trees becoming mere shadows as she ran. She could hear Lucian behind her now, his howl echoing through the night, a sound of recognition, of reunion, of apology that would have to wait. The citadel came into view just as the first explosion shook its walls. Morgana burst through the main gates to find chaos. The courtyard was swarming with wolves she didn't recognize, mercenaries bearing no pack colors, rogues with dead eyes and weapons of silver. They were pouring through a breach in the eastern wall, cutting down guards and servants alike. The air stank of dark magic and fresh blood. At the center of it all stood Ravenna Joseph, no longer playing the role of demure lady-in-waiting. She wore armor of black steel etched with runes that glowed sickly green, and her hands crackled with sorceress energy. Beside her stood a massive wolf with a scarred muzzle and eyes like cold iron. Her father, the southern warlord, who had been banished from all kingdoms for practicing blood magic. "Kill them all!" Ravenna's voice rang across the courtyard, amplified by magic. "Leave no one loyal to the false king. The ironclad pack belongs to me now." Morgana's roar shattered windows. Every wolf in the courtyard froze, their heads snapping toward the gates where she stood. She was impossible to miss, a colossal white wolf radiating power that made the very air shimmer, her violet eyes blazing like twin stars. The celestial wolf, the true Luna, returned from death itself. "You dare!" Morgana's voice resonated with divine authority, speaking in the old tongue that all wolves understood in their bones. "You dare attack my home, threaten my pack, endanger my son." Ravenna's face contorted with rage and fear. "You should be dead. You should be frozen and forgotten. I am eternal as starlight, witch." Morgana descended into the courtyard, each step measured and deliberate. "I am the daughter of the celestial line, Luna Queen of the ironclad pack, and you have committed treason against the throne." The mercenary wolves began backing away, their instincts screaming at them to flee from the predator that had just entered the battlefield. But Ravenna's father snarled, his lips pulling back to reveal yellowed fangs. "She's just one wolf," the warlord growled. "No matter how big, she bleeds like any other. Kill her, and we claim the kingdom." He launched himself at Morgana with the speed of a seasoned killer. 20 other mercenaries followed, their coordinated attack meant to overwhelm through sheer numbers. Morgana met them with the fury of a goddess. Her jaws closed around the warlord's throat mid-leap, and she used his own momentum to slam him into the ground with enough force to crater the stone. Before the others could reach her, she spun, her massive tail sweeping 3 wolves off their feet. Her claws, glowing with celestial fire, tore through armor and flesh like paper. It wasn't a fight. It was a divine reckoning. Morgana moved through the mercenaries like a force of nature, each strike precise and devastating. She didn't kill unnecessarily. These were hired wolves following orders, not the architect of her suffering. But she made it clear that resistance was futile. Bones shattered under her paws. Weapons melted in the heat of her aura. Within minutes, half the mercenary pack was down, groaning in pain or unconscious. The warlord struggled to his feet, blood pouring from the puncture wounds in his throat. "What are you?" he rasped. "Justice." Morgana's voice was cold as the ice that had tried to claim her. "Surrender or die." Behind her, Lucian burst through the gates in his alpha form, followed by what remained of the loyal ironclad guards. The sight of their true Luna, radiant and terrible and undeniably real, sent a surge of hope through the defenders. They rallied, pushing back against the invaders with renewed strength. But Ravenna wasn't finished. "If I can't have this kingdom," she shrieked, her hands weaving complex patterns in the air, "then no one will." The magic she unleashed was foul, a twisting mass of shadow and blood-red light that shot toward the royal tower, toward the nursery, toward Evander. "No!" Morgana's howl was apocalyptic. She leaped, her massive form sailing through the air, positioning herself between the spell and her son. The dark magic slammed into her chest like a battering ram. Pain exploded through every nerve. The blood magic was designed to kill, to corrupt, to destroy from the inside out. It clawed at her heart, her lungs, trying to tear her apart at the cellular level. But Morgana was no longer a broken servant cowering in shadows. She was a celestial wolf, blessed by the moon goddess herself, and her light burned away darkness. The violet fire in her eyes intensified until it was blinding. Her body became a conduit for divine power, channeling starlight itself. The blood magic writhed and screamed as it met its antithesis, pure, uncorrupted celestial energy that could not be tainted. With a sound like a thunderclap, the spell shattered. The backlash hit Ravenna like a physical blow, sending her flying backward into the courtyard wall. Morgana landed gracefully, her chest heaving but her form intact. She turned to face Ravenna, who was struggling to her feet, her armor cracked and her face twisted in desperation. "By the laws of the old packs," Morgana declared, her voice carrying across the courtyard to reach every wolf present, "I invoke the right of sanctified trial. Single combat between sovereigns, witnessed by the pack, blessed by the moon herself. The victor claims dominion. The defeated submits or dies." It was ancient law, older than kingdoms, older than written history. A challenge that no wolf could refuse without being branded a coward and losing all claim to leadership. Ravenna's eyes darted around the courtyard, searching for an escape, but there was none. The mercenaries who remained conscious were backing away, unwilling to interfere in a sanctified trial. Even her father, bleeding and broken, couldn't help her now. The old laws superseded everything. "You can't. I'm not a wolf, I'm a sorceress." "You claimed the right to rule a wolf pack," Morgana said coldly. "You positioned yourself as Luna. You sit on a throne that is not yours. You are bound by pack law whether you like it or not." Ravenna's hands trembled as she raised them, magic crackling between her fingers. "Fine. I'll kill you the same way I've killed everything else that stood in my way." She unleashed everything she had. Waves of shadow magic, bolts of searing crimson energy, curses that could rot flesh from bones. The attack was overwhelming, enough to level buildings, enough to kill a dozen normal wolves. But Morgana simply walked through it. Each spell dissipated against her celestial aura like water against stone. The shadows couldn't touch her light. The curses couldn't find purchase on flesh blessed by divinity. She was inevitable, unstoppable, a force of nature given wolf form. Ravenna stumbled backward, her eyes wide with terror. No, this isn't possible." Morgana shifted mid-stride, her massive wolf form flowing into her human shape. She stood before Ravenna as herself for the first time in 6 months, naked and radiant and terrifying. Her skin glowed with inner light, her violet eyes blazing, her dark hair whipping around her face as if caught in a wind only she could feel. "You took my mate's memories," Morgana said, her voice soft but carrying absolute authority. "You stole my son from my arms. You made me a slave in my own home. You tried to erase me from existence." She reached out and grabbed Ravenna by the throat, lifting her with one hand as easily as a child would lift a doll. "But I am Morgana Jackson Iverson, Luna Queen, Celestial Wolf. And I am eternal." Ravenna clawed at Morgana's hand, gasping for air. "Please, mercy. You showed my son no mercy when you let him scream himself sick every night." Morgana's grip tightened fractionally. "You showed my mate no mercy when you chained his mind. You showed me no mercy when you left me to freeze at the fangs of winter." For a moment, the courtyard held its breath. Would she kill? Would the Luna become an executioner? But then Morgana lowered Ravenna to the ground, though she didn't release her grip. However, I am not you. The trial is over. You are defeated. By pack law you submit or you die. Choose. Ravenna's face was purple, her eyes bulging. When Morgana loosened her grip enough for her to speak, she choked out a single word. Submit. Louder. Let the pack hear you. I submit. Ravenna gasped, the words tearing from her throat like broken glass. I submit to Luna Morgana, true sovereign of the ironclad pack. The moment she spoke the words, magic rippled through the courtyard. The sanctified trial was complete. Ravenna's claim to the throne was shattered. Her power over the pack dissolved. Morgana released her, and Ravenna collapsed to the stones like a puppet with cut strings. Captain, Morgana called, not taking her eyes off the broken sorceress at her feet. One of the loyal guards stepped forward. Take Ravenna Joseph and her father to the dungeons. They will face formal judgment for treason, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Yes, Luna. The guard bowed deeply, his voice thick with emotion. Their true queen had returned. As the guards hauled Ravenna and the warlord away, as the remaining mercenaries were rounded up or fled into the night, Morgana finally allowed herself to turn around. Lucian stood at the edge of the courtyard in his human form, clothed only in the tattered remains of his shift. His face was ravaged with grief and guilt and desperate hope. The mate bond between them thrummed with everything he wanted to say but couldn't find words for. And from the royal tower, Morgana heard it. The sound that had started this entire journey. Evander crying. But this time when she ran toward her son, no one tried to stop her. This time she was going home. The purge came at dawn. Morgana stood in the grand hall, still in her celestial wolf form, as the remaining conspirators were dragged before her. 3 dark mages who had helped Ravenna weave her web of lies, 5 corrupted guards who had knowingly served the usurper, and a handful of court officials who had turned blind eyes to treason in exchange for promised power. They trembled before her, and rightfully so. The celestial wolf was a sight that would haunt their nightmares. Massive and radiant, her violet eyes seeing through every lie, every justification, every plea for mercy they tried to construct. You helped chain my mate's mind, Morgana said, her voice resonating through the hall. You helped imprison your true Luna. You stood by while an infant prince cried himself sick every night. What defense do you offer? The lead mage, a wizened man whose hands still bore the stains of blood magic, fell to his knees. We were paid, promised wealth and position we didn't know. You knew. Morgana's words cut like blades. Dark magic requires intent. Every spell you wove, you knew exactly what you were doing. She let her power build, celestial fire gathering around her like a corona. The mages screamed as divine light engulfed them, burning away not their flesh but something deeper. Their connection to dark magic, the corrupt pathways they'd carved into their souls, the tainted power they'd accumulated through blood and suffering, all of it incinerated by starlight. When the light faded, they collapsed, alive but forever changed. They would never practice magic again. The celestial fire had purged them completely, leaving them as hollow as they'd tried to make her. You will spend the remainder of your lives in service to this kingdom, Morgana declared, rebuilding what you helped destroy. And you will do so knowing that the mercy I've shown you is more than you deserve. The corrupted guards and officials received similar judgment, their positions stripped, their wealth redistributed to the families of those they'd betrayed, their futures reduced to hard labor and penance. By the time the sun fully rose, the citadel had been cleansed. Morgana finally shifted back to her human form, accepting the ceremonial robe that Lucian draped over her shoulders with shaking hands. They hadn't spoken yet, not truly. There were too many witnesses, too much chaos still to manage. But the mate bond sang between them, conveying everything words couldn't. His anguish, his guilt, his desperate need for her forgiveness, and underneath it all, his overwhelming relief that she was alive. She touched his hand briefly, just a brush of fingertips, but it was enough. Later. They would have time to heal later. First, she needed to see her son. The nursery was exactly as she remembered it from her fragmented vision. Silk curtains, carved bassinet, lavender and moonlight. But this time when she approached, no guards stopped her. No one questioned her right to be there. Evander was awake, his violet eyes tracking her movement as she leaned over the bassinet. For a moment, he simply stared, and Morgana's heart clenched. 6 months was a lifetime for an infant. Would he even remember? Then his face split into a toothless smile, and his tiny arms reached for her with absolute certainty. Morgana lifted him, cradling him against her chest as tears streamed down her face. He was so small, so perfect, so utterly hers. His little hand patted her cheek, and he made a soft cooing sound that shattered and remade her heart simultaneously. "I'm here," she whispered against his downy hair. "I'm so sorry, my love. I'm here now. I'll never leave you again." For the first time in 8 months, Evander fell asleep in his mother's arms. And for the first time in 6 months, he slept through the night without crying. 3 days later, the ironclad pack assembled for the ceremony that would restore order to the kingdom. The grand hall had been transformed, draped in silver and white, with moonflowers, Morgana's favorite, woven into every archway and pillar. The pack filled the space, hundreds of wolves who had believed their Luna dead, who had mourned her loss, who now wept openly to see her alive and radiant. Morgana stood at the center of it all, wearing a gown of white silk that seemed to glow with inner light. Her dark hair was unbound, cascading down her back, and the starlight iris blazed in her eyes for all to see. Lucian approached, carrying the Luna's crown, an intricate circlet of silver set with moonstones that caught and refracted light like trapped starlight. His hands trembled as he raised it above her head. Before this pack, before the moon goddess, before all witnesses. His voice rang out, thick with emotion. "I crown Morgana Jackson Iverson as Luna Queen of the Ironclad Pack. She who was stolen from us, she who endured 6 months of torment and emerged stronger than death itself. She who is the light of this kingdom and the keeper of my soul." The crown settled on her head, and power rippled through the hall. The pack howled their approval, the sound shaking the rafters, a chorus of joy and recognition and absolute loyalty. But Morgana raised her hand for silence. "There is one more matter to address." Guards dragged Ravenna Joseph forward. The former would-be Luna was barely recognizable. Her beautiful hair shorn short, her fine clothes replaced with servants' rags, her face gaunt from 3 days in the dungeons. "Ravenna Joseph," Morgana's voice carried no mercy now. "You have been found guilty of treason, conspiracy, the use of blood magic, attempted murder of a Luna Queen, and crimes against the crown. The old laws would permit me to execute you." Ravenna's knees buckled. "Please." "However," Morgana continued, "death would be too easy, too quick. You wanted power, status, a crown." She smiled, and it was terrible to behold. "Instead, you will have exactly what you gave me. Anonymity, servitude, erasure." She gestured, and the head housekeeper, Marta, who had once assigned Morgana the worst tasks, stepped forward with an expression of grim satisfaction. "You are stripped of your title, your lands, your name," Morgana declared. "You will serve in the kitchens of this citadel for the next 20 years. You will scrub the floors I once scrubbed. You will endure the mockery I once endured. You will know what it is to be nothing." Ravenna's face crumpled. "No, please, just kill me." "You will live," Morgana said coldly. "And every day, you will remember that the hollow soul you tried to destroy is the queen who showed you mercy. Take her away." As the guards hauled Ravenna toward the kitchens where she would spend the next 2 decades, as the pack howled their approval of their Luna's judgment, Morgana finally allowed herself to relax. Lucian moved to her side, his arm wrapping around her waist. "Is it truly over?" he whispered. Morgana looked down at Evander, who was sleeping peacefully in a sling against her chest. His tiny hand curled around her finger. She felt the mate bond thrumming between her and Lucian, unbreakable and true. She saw her pack celebrating, her kingdom restored, her name reclaimed. "Yes," she said softly. "It's over. We're home." That night, as the celebrations continued in the halls below, Morgana stood on the royal balcony with Lucian beside her and their son sleeping between them. The moon was full and bright, casting silver light across the kingdom. "I'm sorry," Lucian said for the 100th time, his voice breaking. "Morgana, I'm so sorry. I sent you to die. I didn't see you. I didn't remember." She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. "It wasn't you. It was her magic. And you came for me the moment it broke. I should have known. Mate bond or not, I should have known. You know now." She turned to face him fully, taking his hands in hers. "We both survived, Lucian. We're both here. That's what matters." He pulled her close, careful of their sleeping son, and pressed his forehead to hers. The mate bond sang between them, stronger than ever, tempered by fire and loss and ultimate reunion. "Never again," he swore. "I will never let anyone take you from me again." "Never again," she agreed. And as the celestial wolf and her alpha king stood beneath the moon with their son sleeping peacefully between them, the kingdom of the ironclad pack began to heal. The hollow soul was hollow no more. The ghost girl had become a queen of starlight. And the pup who had cried through 8 months of torment finally slept in his mother's arms, secure in the knowledge that she would never leave him again. Justice had been served. Truth had prevailed. And the Jackson line, blessed by the moon goddess herself, would endure for 1,000 generations more. Thank you for joining the pack today. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe and tap the moon bell so you never miss the next Alpha Destiny. And tell me in the comments, who should we follow next under the full moon?